Warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. We are very excited. We have a wonderful group of people, and we're really looking forward to a very intense and fruitful discussion. I would like to invite our Assistant Director General for Culture, Mr. Ernesto Ottone, to say a few words of welcome to you and give you a little bit of background on this discussion. But before I do that, I just want to explain a little bit the mechanics of how we will go about it. First of all, we have the panelists, and then we have the participants who are the participants of the World Heritage City Lab, which will carry on for a few more sessions after this. And we have for the participants, just to clarify that there is a chat box in which you can have a general discussion, and then there is a question and answer box to answer questions directed at the participants, at the speaker, the panelists. So if you put a question in the chat box, it will not be responded by the participants, by the speakers. For the speakers, I just want to clarify that the format, again, as we had discussed, is that first there are two different panels, and that each group of panelists, we ask one question and give everybody a chance to respond, and then have another question and have everybody a chance to respond, a little bit of discussion, then we move to panel 2. So, and the same, we have one question. So there's no expectation of a presentation, a PPT from anybody, and we would be more than happy to share the PPT with everyone. We'll put it up on our website. If you have, some of you have sent us a presentation, and we'll be very happy to put up and share with everybody on our website. So thank you very much again, and over to you, Mr. Ottone.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you. So I will begin with telling you, chère maire des villes du patrimoine mondial, chère Satya Tripathi, sous-secrétaire générale du PNUE, chers experts du monde entier, c'est avec un grand plaisir que je vous accueille pour le premier webinaire des villes du patrimoine mondial organisé par l'UNESCO, Repenser le patrimoine urbain pour le redressement et la résilience. Les villes du patrimoine mondial sont reconnues pour leurs valeurs universelles exceptionnelles, cœur de notre humanité commune qui doit être protégée et conservée pour les générations futures. Parce que ce sont des villes vivantes, elles ont la capacité de répondre aux besoins et aux aspirations des communautés locales et bien sûr de s'y adapter, tout particulièrement en période de crise comme celle que nous vivons actuellement. La pandémie de Covid-19 a brutalement révélé la fragilité de nos villes et du secteur culturel en particulier. Alors même que les pays planifient leur redressement, la sauvegarde des pratiques, des valeurs et des identités liées au patrimoine culturel doit rester une priorité pour l'élaboration de solutions durables et qui tiennent en compte des besoins socio-économiques actuels des communautés. Depuis plusieurs décennies, l'UNESCO défend une approche de développement durable fondée sur la culture. En 2011, l'UNESCO a placé le patrimoine au cœur de la gestion urbaine en adoptant la recommandation concernant le paysage urbain historique, le HUL, qui présentait pour la première fois les villes comme un ensemble formé d'une multitude de dimensions historiques, culturelles, matérielles et immatérielles. Dans le même temps, cette recommandation a soutenu la mise en œuvre de stratégies de gestion intégrées, permettant à la fois la protection de ces multiples dimensions et aussi le développement durable. Nos efforts, conjointement avec ceux de nos partenaires, ont conduit à l'intégration de la culture dans le programme de développement durable à l'horizon 2030 et dans le nouveau programme pour les villes. Aujourd'hui, le rôle de la culture pour le développement durable est plus pertinent que jamais. UNESCO has responded to the unprecedented impact of COVID-19 by ensuring continued access to culture, supporting the resilience of artists and cultural professionals, assessing the impact, building capacity around heritage safeguarding, and mobilizing governments and partners. UNESCO's global mapping of the impact of lockdowns on World Heritage sites has shown that only 28% of all World Heritage sites are currently open. UNESCO also launched an online survey and platform on the impact of COVID-19 on living heritage, revealing how these practices have served as a source of resilience for communities around the world. Many World Heritage Sites have supported the UNESCO Little Artists exhibition, which has helped raise awareness on World Heritage Sites among the youth. A major report published by UNESCO in late May found that 90% of the world's estimated 95,000 museums closed as a result of COVID-19. At the policy level, UNESCO brought together more than 130 Ministers of Culture through our online meeting in April to discuss the effects of the pandemic on the culture sector and exchange on a way forward. A report with the key findings of the event has been published, and you can find it on our webpage. From World Heritage Sites and living heritage practices to museums and the creative economy, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated just how much people, communities, and countries rely on culture. It has shown us that culture makes us resilient. It has proven that culture is central to sustainable development. The closure of World Heritage Sites and resulting disruption of festivals, rituals, and other intangible cultural heritage practices have deeply affected the livelihoods of local communities and weakened their sense of identity and belonging. While the impact on the tourist industry is unparalleled, with over 120 million jobs currently at threat, the pause in the industry has marked a turning point going forward. It has given us the space to rethink the link between historic cities and their local communities and to strengthen residents' ownership of their cities, their streets, and their public spaces. Many of the required action to achieve the sustainable development goals in the course of his decades, as well as to mitigate and adapt to climate change, seemed unthinkable a few months ago. Yet today, not only are they ever more urgent, but they also seem far more achievable. As some countries begin to recover and rebuild their sense of society, community resilience must be placed at the heart of these efforts. The long-term impact of the crisis could be devastating. We have no time to waste. Now is the time for cooperation, solidarity, and dialogue to reassess our previous models and to plan for a better future. Today's World Heritage City webinar brings together majors of World Heritage cities of different sizes, types, and regions, who are on the front line of the world's global crisis, economic, health, social justice, disasters, and climate change. We also benefit from the participation of leading experts and senior representatives of international organizations whose key insights will undoubtedly contribute to our collective reflection on current challenges and opportunities to conceive innovative solutions. This webinar marks the launch of the World Heritage City Lab, gathering more than 50 experts from all across the globe in an intensive workshop that aims to share, exchange, and develop effective strategies to better manage cultural heritage and respond to the urgent need of local communities in World Heritage sites. I would like to thank all the panelists and participants who have joined us here today. And we look forward to our continued collaboration to support urban areas in leveraging culture-based strategies to build cities that are stronger, more sustainable, more resilient, and more deeply connected to their stories and landscapes. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iucn, for your very inspiring and encouraging words. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our first panel. We have, on the one hand, mayors who have the experience of dealing with these cities and the front lines. And on the other, we have some incredible experts and their views that we're looking forward to listening to. So the cities, we're delighted. First, we welcome the mayor of Tunis, Madame Souad Abdelrahim. Welcome. Then we have the mayor of Dubrovnik, Mr. Mato Frankovic. we have the Additional Commissioner of Jaipur Municipal Corporation from India, Mr. Arun Garg. Welcome. I don't see Mr. Arun Garg, seems to have, I don't see him now online. He was here a few minutes ago. And also from the mayor of Vigan in the Philippines, Mr. Juan Carlos Medina. Welcome, Mayor. So to this first group, if I may ask the first question, we are looking at a situation, obviously, where the COVID-19 pandemic had an enormous impact. What have been some of the key impacts of the pandemic on your city in short term and in the longer term? Obviously, the long term, we are still assessing what these impacts might be, but views on this would be very important. Let me turn first to Madame Suad Abdarrahim from Tunis. Your Excellency, please go ahead. You have to unmute the mic. Madame, please, yes.
Bonjour tout le monde.
We don't hear you yet.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, now we do.
Je voudrais tout d'abord remercier vivement l'UNESCO pour l'aimable invitation et pour l'opportunité qu'elle nous a offerte aujourd'hui pour nous rencontrer et pour échanger nos expériences. Comme vous le savez certainement déjà, Tunis est membre des réseaux des villes créatives et des villes apprenantes de l'UNESCO. Et sa médina, c'est-à-dire la partie historique de la ville, est classée patrimoine mondial de l'UNESCO depuis 1976. Aujourd'hui, plus de la moitié de l'humanité vit dans un environnement urbain, essentiellement dans les villes. L'urbanisation et le développement urbain que connaît le monde font que l'horizon 2050, 70% des 9,5 milliards d'êtres humains qui peupleront notre planète vivront dans les villes. C'est pour cette raison que les risques sont plus aigus dans les villes et leurs répercussions sont de plus graves. Par contre, les conséquences d'une pandémie sur une ville dépendent de la nature de l'organisation économique de la ville en question. En effet, si une ville est mono-industrielle, notamment si elle est uniquement centrée sur le tourisme international ou national, une pandémie comme celle que nous avons connue bloquera toute activité de la ville et des sous-traitants liés à l'économie en question. Pour la médina de Tunis, la question est différente. Elle est sûre qu'une pandémie qui impose un confinement général va bloquer un certain nombre d'activités, mais la médina de Tunis se distingue par ses activités diverses et par le fait qu'elle héberge toujours un grand nombre d'habitants. De ce fait, elle est loin d'être un musée ou une zone touristique artificielle. De ce fait, nous avons remarqué le développement considérable de l'activité de services où l'on a pu constater d'une manière générale que le numérique a été un formidable outil pour surmonter les conséquences liées au Covid-19. La crise a eu pour conséquence de mettre en valeur les qualités humaines des communautés locales. La bienveillance, la solidarité ont structuré tous les gestes des communautés locales. Cela veut dire que des médecins ont soigné les plus pauvres gratuitement, que les ateliers de confection de masques se sont spontanément organisés, que des paniers de vivres ont été distribués sur initiative individuelle ou grâce à des dons de personnalités locales. Cet état d'esprit est celui de l'économie sociale et solidaire. Aussi, dans notre esprit, la médina, d'après Covid, sera obligatoirement le développement d'un système de smart city, c'est-à-dire d'une ville frugale, notamment en consommation énergétique, mais aussi une ville qui s'appuie sur les ressources intellectuelles et le savoir-faire locaux. est l'outil qui favorisera la frugalité et le numérique. Par sa capacité à accumuler les données et la possibilité de les traiter pour adapter les réactions, pour maîtriser les consommations, pour faciliter les services de la personne, cet outil ouvre la porte d'une nouvelle économie, notamment pour notre ville capitale. Merci.
Thank you very much for your responses. Let me turn now to Mr. Mato Frankovic. Mr. Mayor, please go ahead. You have to unmute your mic, sir.
Okay, I think now it should be okay. Can you hear me now well? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Is it okay now? Okay.
We can hear you.
Once again.
Perhaps we give the tech colleagues a chance to check with you on the sound, because unfortunately we don't hear your voice. But meanwhile, maybe we could request somebody else to speak and then come back to you. May I request our tech colleagues to please see if there's a way to help Mr. Frankovic?
Jyoti, we can hear him.
Thank you.
Fine.
If you will excuse Mr. Mayor, we will request Mr. Arun Garg to speak and then come back to you.
Okay.
Mr. Garg? Mr. Arun Garg?
Yeah.
Please, sir.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, there was some problem due to connectivity. I am on my phone. Yeah. Are you able to hear me? Hello? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Mr. Garg, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. As we all are aware, like any other city in the world, Jaipur was also badly affected due to this
Mr.
pandemic.
Garg, we don't hear you, sir.
Okay.
We cannot hear you.
Jyoti, we can hear Mr. Garg.
We just tested all the audios and everything was working, so it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, but we can hear all the gentlemen. So it's not a problem. I don't see a problem.
Okay. Should I continue or wait?
Okay, apparently it's solved. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Like the other cities in the world, Jaipur was also badly affected due to this pandemic, and especially in our world city, which is World Heritage Site. As this is old city, it is densely crowded, and as our heritage is a live heritage, so mainly predominantly there are craftsmen and daily wage earners. So there was completely locked down for 70 days. So the livelihood was a great question for the resident of the walled city. Though state government and municipal corporations took all measures to help the people, but still it was a great challenge. And this was the outcome for the short time. And in the long run, we have to redesign our whole planning, because the world city is already very overcrowded. Now, to ensure social distancing, we have to replan our future strategy. We are in the process of making a special area plan. So definitely this will add new chapters, new dimensions in our planning, and we have to rework on what we have already done for the social area planning. Hello, Jyoti, should I continue?
Yes, please continue. I think the technical problem was my end, but I think we've resolved it. So please go ahead, sir.
Okay.
Hello.
At this juncture, I would like to highlight how the heritage character of the city helped us to take immediate measures to deal with this pandemic. The Jaipur is known for its urban planning, and we have a perfect grid system in the walled city. So walled city was badly affected due to this pandemic. So for creating the containment zones, there was clearly demarcated areas, and we could select the area which was more affected, and we could take measures accordingly. And now we have put all these walled city sites on our GIS map, and we had created food stations for distribution of dry ration, ready food, and other assistance to the localites on the basis of the already structured grid system. Moreover, our walled city, we had 7 gates, 7 big gates, which are entry to our this 9-kilometer long walled city. So we had put our sanitizing machines and team over there. So whichever vehicle is and was entering in the walled city, it was sanitized. Everybody who is going on walking, so his hands will be sanitized in that way, and we could be able to close one of the gate after 78 years, just to 100% control the traffic movement. So the heritage character of our city helps us to take appropriate measures to deal with this pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gag.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Frankovic, please go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me now all well?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank you for giving opportunity for me to speak on behalf of the city of Dubrovnik, which is, as we all know, unique in the world. We faced back in 2017 different issues, and those issues were overcrowding, over tourism, and everything that we had to cope with due to success of Dubrovnik. Unfortunately, now we are on some other track. So first of all, let me give you a quick brief about the COVID crisis in Dubrovnik. We successfully solved it, and now it's already more than 1 month then we do not have any COVID ill patient, and Dubrovnik area, and especially Croatia as well, is under control. So what is very important to mention as well in this is that we are starting with the tourism slowly. International carriers are starting to fly to Dubrovnik. We had 2 days ago first plane. This week we are expecting next planes to come. So we do expect a bit of season to happen, around 30% of the last season. But Dubrovnik is a town which is very, very much connected with the tourism, which relies on tourism. More than 80% of Dubrovnik economy is strictly and strongly connected to the tourism. And the rest is, of course, connected with different other areas. So we can freely say 100% depending on the tourism industry. But we see this, of course, as a problem, and we do believe that this will pass in 6 or 7 months' time, that the new season 2021 will happen. Again, not in the numbers like in 2019, but I have to point out that we see this as a great opportunity for the new restart of Dubrovnik city, and the new opportunity for really putting our city on track of sustainable tourism. You know that we were back in the 1991 under the heavy war attacks, and we learned a lot of stories from that time. And back at that time, actually, the UNESCO preservers were saying, please keep in mind that this city is going to be rebuilt, and that after that you will have opportunity to have a city with sustainable tourism. We didn't keep in mind that at that time, so we had an over-tourism that happened back in 2017. So even knowing that our citizens are living out of tourism, and that this is a base economy of our city, we do not want to make once again mistake like we did in back years. So this is a great opportunity to restart, a great opportunity to change some things, and we will definitely use them. The cultural heritages, of course, are the cities that are going to recover the fastest, considering the tourism industry, because the opportunity to see the cultural goods, of course, are something which everyone wants to use, and especially now when you have a lower number of people in destination, then the cities are going to be even beautiful than they were before. So of those opportunities, of course, are ahead of us. Once again, I want to state that the health crisis, we really handled it good, and we did it very well considering that. And now the financial crisis is something that cope us, but we believe that we are going to go through that as well as through the health crisis.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me turn now to Mr. Juan Carlos Medina, Mayor of Vigan City. Please, sir, go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. First, I would like to thank UNESCO for considering the city of Vigan for this webinar. For our answer to the first question, just like most of the cities in the world, Vigan, a World Heritage Site and a tourist destination, was not spared from the disruption and serious threat because of the health, social, and economic emergency the COVID-19 pandemic has brought us. Unprecedented global travel restrictions and stay-at-home orders are causing the most severe disruption of the global economy. With travel bans affecting over 90% of the world population and widespread restrictions on public gatherings and community mobility, tourism largely ceased in early this year because of the virus. With this, tourism is especially susceptible to measures to counteract pandemics because of restricted mobility and social distancing. Vigan's tourism sector is the hardest hit by the situation. Among all the sectors, the city tourism has earlier experienced a rapid and sharp drop in demand and a surge in job losses, even at the local level, putting many businesses, especially SMEs, at risk. As early as January, we have already felt the emerging impact of this health situation. Though the country only had its first case in February, our city already felt a slender supply side impact, especially on tourism. We celebrate our Longanisa festival every last week of January. Unlike in the previous years, where we usually have thousands of tourist arrivals in the month of January, this year it declined by 82%, from 120,815 in January last year to 21,563 in January this year. The months of January to June would have been the peak season, but this year we have an estimated loss in gross income for tourism-related businesses of 232,733,865 pesos from March to May alone. While there is tourism's proven resilience in response to other crises, the depth and breadth of the current pandemic will likely have a longer-lasting impact compared to other industries. The uncertainty and decline in travel also led to people staying off work, losing income, and causing a fall in demand. Tourism-related business have most suffered, particularly food, accommodations, and tourist attractions. As most of business establishments are required to close during the enhanced community quarantine in the Philippines, the pandemic has put up thousands of jobs in travel and tourism sector at risk, most likely to slump by a quarter this year. In the city, 68% of the total businesses had to stop operating because of guidelines and restrictions during the quarantine. Sadly, there are still business owners who are already allowed to operate during the gradual lifting of the quarantine, still choose to close their establishments because of the virus. These circumstances also led to decrease of income for the people of Vigan, unemployment because of establishments that are still closed, and those that laid off employees, and generally a significant impact on the economic situation of the city. The city government extended assistance to those who are greatly affected, particularly the displaced workers. A one-time financial assistance of 4,000 pesos was given to displaced workers affected by the quarantine. Although still a relatively high number of new cases emerge every day in the Philippines, with the work of the local health unit in the city, and collaborative efforts of the City Task Force Against COVID and other agencies, the health situation in Bigan is effectively managed. The city government requires business owners who are allowed to operate to undergo orientation on minimum health standards for business establishments conducted by the City Health Office as prerequisite for operation. Considerable challenges remain ahead, starting with the unknown duration of the pandemic and travel restrictions. In the context of global economic recession, Bigan, along with other heritage cities around the world, is implementing a wide range of measures to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak and to stimulate the recovery of all the sectors affected, particularly the tourism sector. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Now, what I would like to do is we're running rather late now and behind time, so I would like to just ask the same question and request you to give very, very short answers, and we will have more, we'll pick up more during the discussion. What role do you see for heritage in recovery and rebuilding, both in the short term and in the long term? And if you could say this very briefly, what key steps you're thinking of taking towards using heritage as part of the plan for recovery and rebuilding, this would be great. Just before we do that, may I request all the panelists to kindly turn your cameras on for a minute so we could have a group photo? May I please request all the panelists to turn your cameras on for a quick group photo? I think we're still missing some panelists. Okay, try again after a few minutes because we are missing also the Mayor of Tunis. Okay, thank you very much. Please, may I request the Madame Abdelrahim from Tunis to respond to this question on the key role of heritage for rebuilding and recovery?
Merci madame. Malheureusement, je ne peux pas ouvrir la caméra. J'ai un problème technique. Donc, pour la réponse à votre question, il est incontestable que le confinement nous a empêchés de poursuivre les travaux d'entretien et d'embellissement de notre patrimoine. Avec la reprise des activités, nous allons poursuivre les programmes prévus et dans ce cadre, il est évident que l'activité engendrée par ces réhabilitations aura une conséquence sur le développement économique. L'investissement dans le patrimoine est un facteur de développement bien connu. Il crée un climat de confiance bénéfique pour les entreprises. Patrimoine et confiance sont donc très liés. La sauvegarde du patrimoine monumental a joué un rôle important dans la création de la dynamique socio-culturelle et économique de la Médina de Tunis. Il s'agit de projets ponctuels à fort impact visuel. Parmi les plus récents, il y a la restauration de l'ancienne église Sainte-Croix et de son presbytère qui abritera un centre méditerranéen des arts appliqués. Nous avons aussi la restauration de l'école des garçons de la rue Jemma Zitoun, édifiée pendant l'époque coloniale, qui a un temps abrité l'ambassade du Danemark. Elle est à présent reconvertie en mairie d'arrondissement. Je citerai la reste de la Médersa Birlajan du XVIIIe siècle, mise aux normes pour un centre culturel, un circuit touristique entier. Le quartier de Le Pacha.
Madame?
Oui, vous m'entendez?
On n'entend pas clairement. On n'entend pas clairement. Oui, oui, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Ok. Donc, pour compléter, il y a eu la réhabilitation de deux circuits touristiques entièrement restaurés, l'un au nord et l'autre au sud de la ville. À présent, nous souhaitons réhabiliter un troisième quartier de la Médina et nous sommes en contact avec des bailleurs internationaux pour avancer là-dessus. Nous misons aussi sur la valorisation du patrimoine immatériel qui est en capacité d'attirer la solidarité locale et de mettre en valeur un espace emblématique de la ville qui mérite d'être animé pour favoriser l'adhésion de la population. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la maire. Okay, I will now request Mr. Frankovic, Mayor of Dubrovnik, to please, sir, speak very briefly at this point.
Thank you. Once again, heritage and recovery are jointly bonded, and it cannot go once without other. As I already mentioned in my previous speak, this time it's much easier, considering the heritage in Dubrovnik is in, of course, very, very good shape, and we are continuously investing in the heritage preservation, both tangible and intangible, and definitely advantages of the UNESCO World Cities will be the richness of its heritage. So I'm deeply convinced that the UNESCO World Heritage City sites will recover much quicker than the other cities in the world, considering tourism. But of course, as I said previously, this is a great opportunity which we cannot miss, and with this we can do a lot of good, because many UNESCO cities were actually coping with the problem of over tourism. So this is a time where we as UNESCO World Cities can use this as opportunity to put our cities in a place of sustainable world cities.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I turn to Mr. Arun Garg. Sir, please continue.
Yeah, as time is constant, I would like to be brief. As I mentioned earlier, during this pandemic, the grid system of our heritage city helped us a lot to manage the situation, because we had alternate routes for every location, so we could decide where we should barricade and we should allow the people to flee. For the future planning, we are going to use this urban planning character. As I told, we are already on GIS map. So we have taken few measures. We have identified certain hazardous industries which are there in the walled city, and we would love to shift them outside walled city due to various reasons, and moreover seeing this pandemic. Second, for capacity building, we are organizing seminars with our craftsmen, because Jaipur is known for living heritage. We have 36 type of local crafts, so we are going to promote. We have separate strategy for each crafts. Right now, around 28 of them are live. So we are working on it. We are doing for capacity building. We are devising some local strategies that where the local people, they can come forward and save our heritage as well as promote our tourism. So we are using technology, we are using public participation, we are providing finance, we are doing capacity building. In this way, learning from our experience of about 3 months in this pandemic, we are modifying our proposed special area plan, and definitely we will come up with a more concrete strategy. So in future, if anything such happens, we will be more stable, we will be more comfortable to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Please, Mayor Medina, please go ahead.
Heritage conservation being one of the pillars of the city's development cannot be compromised, as we are doing efforts to help the tourism sector through heritage-based strategies in rebuilding cities to be more sustainable, more resilient, and more deeply connected to our histories. Programs and activities are being discussed and ironed out for implementation, such as provision of loans to small and medium-scale entrepreneurs to help them augment their losses during the quarantine. Aside from MSME loans, moratoriums on rent, tax reduction and incentive schemes, and other financial assistance are granted to them. As part of the recovery plan for our traditional industry, means of helping them market their products are also at the work. The local government highly encourages people to support and buy local products through various platforms such as social media campaigns, while helping our key players market their products in the digital platform. Collaborating with other industries is also being considered. The income from the sale of the products will not only augment the industry, but will be an effective tool to promote the city and to revive the interest of the people, whether local or tourists, in our heritage. Furthermore, safeguarding of intangible and tangible heritage is still one of the priorities through the continuous implementation of the existing ordinances and laws on heritage preservation and the conservation guidelines with the efforts of the Vegan Conservation Council. Due to uncertainty of the period of travel bans, closures, and restrictions to mass gatherings, the City Events and Promotions Office are considering alternative strategies and scenarios in celebrating city events and festivals. Lastly, the city is exploring its resources, so slowly migrate its services to adopt digital solutions. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, sir. Let me now turn to our Assistant Secretary General for UN Environment. Would you be able to comment a little bit on how you think local resources can be most effectively harnessed to enhance the resilience of cities, especially heritage cities?
Thank you. I would draw upon my experience 20 years ago when I served for the UN in Bosnia. One of the cities there, Mostar, which the mayor of Dubrovnik would very well recognize, is a World Heritage site, and UNESCO was responsible for reconstructing that famous bridge in Mostar, which was destroyed during the Bosnian War. And one could clearly see the before and after impact of one heritage site being brought back to life, and how the entire city of Mostar came back to life with people being positively impacted by the recovery of that heritage that they take a lot of pride in, and international tourism literally rebounding. So the disaster remains. And in that context, that sustainable consumption and production is extremely important to impact people while not adversely impacting on the sustainability of cities. Because what we have seen now is that the accumulation of urban waste and the lack of proper management practices of waste is greatly impacting heritage cities, because we somehow believe that once we put everything in our landfills, then the problem goes away. The problem actually multiplies itself. To give a small example, every year we produce 300 million tons of plastic, which is equal to the entire weight of the human biomass on the planet. While the human biomass remains constant, we keep adding 300 million tons of plastic, only 9% of which has ever been recycled. So we have roughly 9 billion tons of plastic in our oceans, in our rivers, in our landscapes. So while heritage should be the cornerstone of our cultural being, which is so important to understanding what we are as humans, our history, our heritage, but at the same time, we have taken to modern science in a way like never before, which is greatly impacting the heritage monuments and everything else that you have. So when we try to rebuild from COVID-19 especially, the greatest challenge is, as you would all know, that even before COVID-19, in the next 30 years, we were about to spend anywhere between $40 to $70 trillion in building urban infrastructure. Every day, we're actually building a new Paris in construction terms, where the UNESCO headquarters are. And if we do not put sustainability at the heart and center of whatever it is that we are doing, we are going to lose all our heritage. And that's a risk that we really need to keep in mind when we try to spring back to economic prosperity and growth. It cannot come at the cost of our climate, our environment, and our heritage, because without heritage, we are no better than any other planet. And all of the SDGs, which are extremely crucial to keep in mind when we plan our recovery, we have a great opportunity because every country on the planet, every nation is now looking at recovery plans. What kind of stimulus packages can they, within the limits of their resources and imagination, what kind of stimulus packages can they put in place to recover from the horrendous situation that we all find ourselves in. But at the same time, people must be at the center of that conversation. The planet must be at the center of that conversation. And a great place to start is our heritage sites, because that's what draws. And as the mayor of Dubrovnik rightly pointed out, heritage cities will recover much faster than other cities, because people have something to go to that they have been thinking of for a long time. And we have a great opportunity. As great as the damage is, we also have a great opportunity to recover sustainably and keeping in mind the fact that the next 10 years are going to be extremely crucial for the planet, not just for the achievement of the SDGs, but also from the climate perspective, if we want to stay under 2 degrees Celsius of global warming or 1.5 degrees as the IPCC recommends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. These were really important, sobering thoughts that you've brought up, sobering points. Ms. Shireen or Salim, we are delighted to have you here. Could you please reflect a bit on this point about how local resources could be most effectively harnessed to enhance the resilience of cities? You've often talked about the 3 Hitakara, for example.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity, Yoti and Ernesto, and also listening to the panelists. I think like Satya, whom I'm very pleased to see here. You know, we have been in Jakarta, but to meet virtually and to meet many of you here. I think UNESCO, what he has said, that the UNESCO heritage site is really a great place to start. And I think our cultural and natural heritage on myself and many probably in this room's bucket list. So I'm happy I have been to Jaipur and the Philippines, but not yet the other 2. So I think with this pandemic, I think it's really, listening to what has been shared, we really need to put our heads, our hearts, and our hands together to explore with the World Heritage City Lab, how to support resilience and recovery. So many of the government panelists have been putting in local resources to support. And one concept that we have been working on is that could be explored is blended finance. So blended finance is a strategic use of development or public funds or philanthropic funds as a concessionary capital that would be able to crowd in private sector funds, which is the larger resources that would be needed, I think, in order to meet the sustainable development goals and related investments. So not all projects can be blended finance. So, if they can be done privately without public or philanthropic funding, then they should not be blended finance. But I think a lot of the sites, to do restoration, conservation, to save our history and our natural, I think many of the sites are in danger of, in grave danger. So I think that really would qualify. So I would think that is one aspect. And maybe just as a background, I think in 2 years ago, Indonesia hosted, I think in my background, you see this is the, a Balinese, we call it the 3 mountains, but it's a building made of bamboo. So Bali hosted the world's largest finance event of the year, the World Bank IMF annual meetings. So around that time, the Trita Karana Forum for Sustainable Development partnered with International Chambers of Commerce, UNSCSN, OECD, World Bank, IMF, CDB, many partners to come together to think about blended finance. So we hosted the blended finance event, and I think we were very pleased with the outcome, which was actually unexpected. The Indonesian president was the honorary patron, and so we had like $1 billion women fund that emerged. We had Indonesia SDG Indonesia 1 that was launched on infrastructure that they raised $3 billion, and so there's outcomes that were real. I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. How do we actually practice? How do you apply it? But I think we already saw sort of some of the investment, like the women that into people that we know, and so I think it is worthwhile to explore for UNESCO sites or the government to think about blended finance. And OECD and our partners have this sort of regular discussions, and how do we convene a roadmap towards the blended finance. And so that there is that possibilities, and we will host the next event in November. So I think again, last time we had a strong presence of also many inspiring leaders from around the world. So I think we could explore working with UNESCO and the sites on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, Mr. Tripathi, if I can come back to you to reflect. You already gave us some insights, but on how we could rethink urban development and role of cultural heritage to enhance well-being and sustainability of urban areas. Your mic has to be unmuted, sir.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Well, very briefly, I think, as I was saying earlier, we really need to rethink the whole development model that we have now, or the tourism model for that matter. Sustainability ought to be at the core of improving well-being and sustainability, in the sense that when we, just to give you an example, the Caribbean countries, especially that have very high value tourism, actually import pretty much everything that is consumed, not just for the tourism sites or the facilities or the resorts, but also for pretty much for the local population. Because there has been so much emphasis on tourism that everything else is not a priority anymore, because this is more value. But at the same time, as we become more and more prone to climate shocks and environmental degradation, as is happening now, to give you, many of your speakers have pointed to this, that the tourism numbers have dropped precipitously as compared to last year. Pretty much zero arrivals in many countries because international flights have been shut down. And so do the exports and the imports. That whole thing stops because there's no consumption anymore, and that impacts food security and the well-being of local communities, because one is not used to growing anything locally anymore. So I think an emphasis on building back better through reinforcing and strengthening the local economies, and so that it is anchored, and little things like growing even vegetables or food grains locally is not a very difficult thing. It's just that the priorities have been different, and I sincerely hope leaders, whether they be mayors of cities or local governments or subnational or national governments, would really look at strengthening the ecological architecture and agroecology-based farming practices in and around cities, so that they can be self-sustaining, coherent units where they can not only look after themselves in terms of environmental protection and food security, but also look after their guests. And then that also will speak to local culture, not just the we're talking about cultural heritage here, but also the food culture, also the cuisine, and everything else. So I think we have an opportunity here, and also to look at the possibilities of, and Sherry rightly pointed out that there's a great opportunity here to look at blended finance as a very empowering tool to draw resources into cities with a different thought process, a different mindset, with different expected outputs and outcomes. And I think that will go a long way in making our cities sustainable and making our cultural heritage much more respected than it is, because it's more transactional now, that people show up and I saw a good building and I take a picture in front of it, than to understand everything, how people live. The additional commissioner from Jaipur talked about the crafts and bringing back craftsmen, and so that because if we don't focus on these as engines of economic growth, then we risk losing them, and that's not a good thing for either us as humans or for the planet as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nur Salim, over to you for your response briefly.
Sure. So I think earlier you asked about the Trihita Karana, right? It's our forum. So actually, I found out that this is also a part of the UNESCO culture heritage. So let me just explain a little bit. Tri is three, the number three. Hita is happiness, and Karana is the ways, the reasons, or the three ways to happiness. So what are the three ways to happiness that the Balinese believe in? Because our forum was hosted there and our foundation started there. And so what they believe is the harmony of people with other people, among people, harmony of people with nature, and harmony of people with the spiritual. So the three harmonies are the ways to happiness. And I think that we are using these principles because I'm also from the private sector. We have a development in Bali called Kura Kura Bali. And that development, we want to use the local Trihita Karana principle. So I think sort of this question about how to work with the local principles as you rethink cities, we are really embodying that. And so we actually created at the core of this project is a campus. So we really believe that everything, you start with people and start with nature and start with the spirit. And so this campus, we are also bringing in value creation. So I think the new president is Edward Crawley, who is a MIT. He helped Cambridge University build a technology campus and also Covet Technology University. So he's a technology person, but a president or provost. And we also partner with Tsinghua University that will do their Southeast Asia campus, and UNSDSN that will have their Southeast Asia campus. So the whole development we're dedicating to supporting the SDGs. So, and we call it the Happy Island of Happiness. But we are looking at it with value creation. So how do we help the local communities in terms of, I was just messaging today with this Pasar Bali, so the local market. So they came together, the communities came together just to create farms to survive, with the COVID issues. And so I think it's creating livelihood and creating sort of technology platform that support these activities. And I think there are, our foundation has been working on with many partners, but MIT in particular, we have been working on leadership program, and we support youth leaders and indigenous communities. So we think we have to empower the local community. So we give the chance for those who are the farmers, or those who are fishermen, or those who are the craftspeople, as well as the youth. So I think focusing on youth and indigenous community, as well as tri-sector leaders. so government leaders, business leaders, as well as academic leader, media leaders, NGO leaders. So we work with them closely, and so we are going to develop the happy digital city. So this is something that we are working on, and we are doing like camps and co-creations. Now we do a lot of these virtually. So I think we welcome sort of sharing. And I also want to mention that UNESCO also gave the award to Bahasa Bali, which is a project that we have also supported on the environmental side. So there's a character, it's Balinese language, supporting Balinese language, and a character, a beautiful heroine, Ayu Manik, and she is explaining about Trihita Karana. So this is like outreach, and we appreciate UNESCO for giving that award. Thank you.
Thank you for these very interesting ideas and possibilities and opening it up. I'd just like to open up now to the floor very shortly to see if there are questions from the participants. We already have one question, and I'd like to request the participants, please put up your hand you have the possibility to raise your hand and type your question within the question and answer box, and then we can request the panelists to respond shortly. So one question that we have already from Ms. Irina Iamandescu is she's asking how we can, in a situation where financial resources are being concentrated towards health and social priorities, how can we influence the funding of restoration works in these historic cities? I open it up to any of the panelists who would like to speak. Yes, Mr. Francevic, please.
First of all, Republic of Croatia, of course, Dubrovnik as well, as a part of European Union, is maximally using EU funds in restoring new attractions in the city. So through the EU funds, really we are investing a lot of money currently in recovering World Heritage sites. More than 10 million euros are invested in new rebuilding and restoring. So EU funds are definitely one of the financial strong parts that can help us as a part of the European Union.
Thank you. Anybody else who would like to respond? Or we could also collect the couple other questions. I can see another hand up. Maybe we can collect it and come back to the panelists. I see the hand of Russell Gold. Would you like to speak up? We can give you the microphone to speak. Please.
Thank you very much, Jyoti. This is Russell calling from Iucn, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So thank you to UNESCO for connecting us to this really important agenda. And I'm delighted to join you as the head of the Iucn Urban Alliance, which is a broad coalition of partners collaborating towards greener cities. Now we see cities as urban ecosystems in which nature and people can thrive together. And we know that nature delivers a range of services to people in cities, and it's essential for resilience, livability, for justice. And we don't just have a public health crisis, we have an environmental crisis. And so we're really interested to learn from the panelists, how can we really connect the culture and nature agendas when we bounce back, when we bounce forward together? And also on the topic of sustainable tourism, I was very interested to learn about localization efforts. How is it that we can return to previous levels of international tourism, which are of course highly dependent on flying, and still meet the global targets of reducing emissions by 7.6% per year for the next decade if we are to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal? So two questions there. One on how to adjoin the nature and culture agendas when we bounce back in the recovery, and secondly, how to address sustainable tourism and particularly flying. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I'd like also to add to that the question that was asked earlier about the funding and financial resources and directing to restoration works in the city. So there are three questions now on the table. Anyone else who would like to raise their hand or ask question? We could collect. Yes, please. I see Nyati. Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Nyati and Rami.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm from Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and I work for the National Gallery of Zimbabwe. When the mayor from Tunis was speaking, I could not help but reflect that for many cities in the third world, they are governed without explicit or implicit cultural policies. And I was keen to get an appreciation of some of the governance mechanisms that are in place that have facilitated that some of these cities take a strong and keen interest in matters to do with culture. I know it's a pregnant question, but what are some of the key governance mechanisms that are enabling some of our cities to mainstream culture in their service delivery mandate?
Thank you very much. Rami, please, Rami Daher, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
My question is regarding also in terms of general development, the current neoliberal moment that we are part of, unfortunately, with a lot of developments that are anti-inclusion, catering mainly only for the rich, and also when many states and cities embrace such developments while they are partners with such projects and so on, how can we make sure that states' responsibilities towards historic cities are maintained? Because a lot of these neoliberal development, even though they do claim a lot of progress, they end up having major adverse effects on historic cities and also on the landscape and on nature regarding not, for example, allowing energy production through, for example, sustainable ways to enter into the system, or minimizing basically funding that is geared towards municipalities and what have you. So my question is briefly, within a neoliberal agenda that is actually flourishing in the world, how can we maintain that states keep up their responsibilities towards historic cities?
Thank you very much. Okay, so there's quite a few questions, and I have a few more here in the question box, but let's see if any of the panelists would like to respond to the questions that have been raised. The floor is open to any of the panelists to respond.
May I respond to the questions from the gentleman from Iucn who raised a very significant point that we need to, as the Unep emissions gap report, which comes out every year, the last one that came out at the end of 2019, points out that we need to reduce 7.5% of our annual emissions, which is in the range of 40 to 45 GTs, gigatons of CO2 equivalent every year. It varies a little bit every year, but not much. It's about 40. And we need to really go down precipitously in terms of the amount of CO2 that we emit to be able to stay within the realm of sustainability. The global carbon budget is 2,900 gigatons for the 2-degree pathway. And we've already spent pretty much 2,600. So we are perilously close to actually shooting through the possibility of ever remaining at 2 degrees Celsius by the turn of the century. And in that, heritage and the culture, we have to broaden the understanding of culture, not just culture as in built heritage, but also the ecological heritage, which, if you take the case of Indonesia, it is home to one of the most diverse ecosystems, whether it is in terms of plant species or animal species. And same if you take the case of the Amazon in South America, and they are also the rain factories of the world. So recovery cannot be without improving grassroots prosperity of people. And in that, bringing nature into the mainstream of the conversation of investment. Currently, what has been the case for the last few decades is that nature is seen as an extractive resource, that we can draw whatever we want from Mother Nature without having to bother about what happens, and the others can pick up the pieces. So it has been private profits and public losses across the planet. There is no difference between developed countries and developing countries. Maybe some countries are a little worse off than the others, or had more resources per capita to use or waste than others. But the fact remains that the situation is not very different in any country. But we cannot do that any longer. We really need to bring nature back into the mainstream of the conversation and understand that nature doesn't need us. We need nature to survive. And in that, developing financial models of investment, Unep has supported two big projects. One in Indonesia, we helped set up something called the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility. The first investment there is a $350 million project to protect forests. And it's a partnership with the corporate sector, with Michelin, with a company called RLU in Indonesia. And they have done amazing work in protecting a 300,000 hectare natural landscape in Bukit Tigapulu. Something similar in India, which is transforming the landscape there, is in the state of Andhra Pradesh, where out of the 6 million smallholder farmers there, 1 million have already converted to zero chemical farming. And now the government of India is actually looking at ways and means with which they can actually do it in a cost-neutral way, because currently, just to give you a quick financial model, the government of India spends about $13 billion every year on fertilizer subsidies. And the cost of converting the entire 140 million farmers in the country to zero chemical farming is about $50 to $60 billion, even factoring in inflation over the next 10 years. And so if you're spending 13 billion already on pesticide and fertilizer subsidies, and you only need 60 billion to convert everybody in a sustainable scientific way, not referring to it as our grandparents' agricultural model, but anchoring it deeply in science and technology and drawing the best from those ancient practices and applying them to current day agriculture, you can actually turn the Titanic around. And in just last 29th May, under the leadership of the Planning Minister of India and the Agriculture Minister, there was a high-level roundtable that we helped pull together. And it was amazing to listen to global experts coming together and say that, you know, this is what India is attempting is actually not just for India, it will be for the world, not just in terms of adaptation and mitigation, but also bringing back India's agricultural heritage and putting it front and center of its development and growth trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to keep, we have a response for anybody else who'd like to respond to these several questions that have been raised. That's one of the mayors from the cities. Sherry, please go ahead.
So I think I have, I really am very hopeful that I think what Satya, he has shared science-based approach to support the natural capital could and also support the communities would succeed. And I think we try to, we think like as you do your lab, the heritage lab, I think that's what we really want, right? To create something with the traditional that enhance the traditions, enhance the science, but at the same time create livelihoods and opportunities. And there are many examples of that. You know, like the Bali had the Subak system, which again also is part of the UNESCO heritage, the way of farming. You know, but I think at some point that was sort of lost, and I think many agricultural practices can be brought back, and I think Indonesia has this Raja Ampat, which is one of the most important biodiverse Indonesia is the world's, I think, largest archipelago and has the most marine biodiversity. And there's a place called Miso Resort where I think it was quite depleted, a lot of biodiversity, but by sort of this one effort by one resort to actually is able to restore it. And I think we try to also use technology. So there's this global crowdsourcing ideas to help, and we have sort of engaged communities to work on these type of ideas. And I think that I'm sure you have many of these ideas. We need a platform, and I think UNESCO may be a place where you could have this sharing of platform of the good practices. You know, we have a lot, and I love what the Mayor Tunisia said. You know, we just need to build trust, right? And then we have to rebuild things together. And how to have the science and the ancient, and put our heads together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two more questions here in the question box, and I'm going to ask the people who asked the questions to speak up. So Mr. Mohsen Abbasi, if you could please raise your hand and speak. And also Mr. Lassana Sisse. Mr. Abbasi, you have the floor. Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Mr. Abbasi.
Hello,
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for the meeting. I have a question. Knowing about tourist industry as a great economic World Heritage cities, what do you think in terms of tourist bad advantages for heritage, in terms of decreasing tourist bad advantages for heritage by corona pandemic? Can it be considered as an opportunity in this way?
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Mr. Lassana Sisse, please, you have the floor. Please go ahead, Mr. Sisse. Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Sisse. Possibly there is a problem with the microphone. Maybe what I can do is I can just speak and ask his question. He's asking, beyond in most of the side. Yes, please.
Allô?
Go ahead. Oui, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Voilà, donc ma question, c'est que, alors jusque-là, on a parlé de l'impact du tourisme, enfin, essentiellement du tourisme, de l'économie l'économie générée par le tourisme à cause de la crise sanitaire qu'on connaît. Bon, à ma connaissance, ces sites, parce qu'on parle des villes du patrimoine mondial, ont eu des économies traditionnelles. Si je prends le cas on parle de la Tunisie, de Tunis par exemple, la Médina de Tunis. Alors, l'activité principale traditionnelle, c'est autour du commerce et de l'artisanat traditionnel. Quel impact? Parce que là, il y a une économie locale qui a été certainement touchée, mais qui contribue, en fait, qui doit contribuer à l'entretien de ces sites-là, de ces villes-là, dans le cadre global de la gestion de la ville avec la municipalité. Quel impact à ce niveau peut-on relever et comment les acteurs sont en train de résister? Voilà ma question. J'en ai fini.
Thank you very much. Okay, merci beaucoup, Mr. Sisse. Is there anybody from the panelists who would like to respond? Any of the mayors, perhaps? Yes, Mr. Garg, please go ahead. You have to unmute your mic, sir.
Okay. Regarding one point raised by IUCN about the addressing nature and culture, so I would like to mention that we have already taken ambitious projects for reviving our natural and historic water bodies, and we are blessed that Jaipur walled city is surrounded by famous forts, Amber, Jagar, Nahargarh, etc. Heritage cities geographically and physically, and looking to this, we have planned accordingly so that the nature, the geography, the climatic condition are helping us to design tailor-made policies for this area. Thank you.
We can't hear you.
I'm very happy to invite in the second panel Mr. Omar Mohammed Famu, Mr. Mayor of Lamu from Kenya. Welcome to you. And then we have also Ms. Stefania Proietti, Mayor of Assisi. Welcome, Madam. We are very sorry to learn that Mr. Luis Bernardo Navaguerrero, Mayor of Querétaro, has fallen sick, unfortunately, with the COVID-19, and this is we just learned this yesterday. So, first alderman of the city council, Mr. Miguel, has very kindly agreed to speak and on his behalf. So I'm very happ't to introduce Mr. Miguel Perodi, who will be speaking on behalf of the mayor. And we're also, we have experts, Mr. Pierluigi Sacco, head of the Venice office of the OECD, Mr. Michael Sudarkasa, who is the CEO of the Africa Business Group. Welcome. And finally, we have Ms. Rebecca Abers, who's the professor at the Universidad de Brasilia. Welcome. So let's start with the city experiences. So perhaps if I could turn first to the mayor of Lamu, Mr. Omar Mohammed Famu, and ask you very briefly to tell us that while we're waiting for this recovery of international tourism to happen, what actions could support the well-being of the local communities? How do you see it? You need to unmute your mic. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Ready?
Yes.
Excellent. Hello. Yeah. Actually, when this happens, as far as Lamu is concerned, when the technical lockdown it took happens, most of the areas were affected due that we are connected to Lamu is connected to Malindi and Mombasa. Now, Malindi and Mombasa and Nairobi, those are the areas which were affected most. So there was no movement which took place. So we were like isolated when the COVID-19 happened. So we consequently suffered a lot when the movement stopped, especially with tourism. It's collapsed like 100%. So the tour guides were really affected, and all the shopkeepers, hoteliers, etc. Now, one of the things also, or when it comes to social gathering, as we're all aware that it was also close to the month of Ramadan. So we could not have the social gathering, we could not attend meetings or iftari together since there was a cave. You could only be out until 7 o'clock at night, and the rest of the time you were supposed to be indoors. So it was really I huge things. It happens, especially the month of Ramadan. We lost all those lovely and which we used to enjoy Muslims stroke Swahili culture. Again, the issue of the going to the mosque, especially Jamia Mosque. Jamia, that means Salah ya Jama, we all have to be together, which is recommended by the Almighty Allah. By doing so, with the Jama Salah, you have 27 points besides one. So we also lost that one, which is really an issue for the Muslim actually all over the world. Also affected us most. Okay, we have been doing prayers in the houses, but again, it's really an issue. Going fishing, for example, you cannot go to fishing, especially during the night. So the economy of Lamu really collapsed totally. The local livelihoods, due to the guidelines, the social distance, it really affected a lot of jobless people took place. So in general, social life and economic life has been greatly affected. Now, what we've been doing, the provision of water points so that we can do the wash hands and sanitizers. We have been doing a lot of cleanliness in the city. Of course, I've been doing that, but we have been doing a lot of a little bit more so that people like tour guides, fishermen, they can also get some work to substitute not going fishing, no tourism. We have also provided masks to the local residents all over the heritage area sites and also the entire Lamu County. We have been doing that, providing soaps, sanitizers, also provision of supplementary relief food for the residents since most of the people have lost jobs. We have been doing a lot of awareness through media, social media. We have been also employing local residents to go one-to-one also to do awareness as far as the COVID-19 is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me move now to the mayor of, to the representative Querétaro, Mr. Miguel Parida. Miguel Parodi, please. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Adria Soleil, General Director of UNESCO, Mexar Rosler, Director of the World Heritage Center, and Frederic Acheron, UNESCO's representative in Mexico, for inviting us to this World Heritage City Lab. Thank you also to Jody Hosagraher, as Deputy Director. It is a pleasure to be here with you. It is in the most difficult times that looking back to our history becomes imperative to see ourselves as individuals, as societies, as humanity, as the point where the past and the future meet. Our past must be seen and cherish our future dream and work for. Social isolation, staying home, might seem to separate us, but we have been called, as never before, to be together as humanity, and nothing can unite us more than our history, our heritage, as motivation to overcome this and build together a better future. To answer the first question, our bet is on the local market. Our bet is on the local markets, promoting local consumption on local businesses of local products and services. We have been working on that through social media and a digital platform to get together local supply and local demand. For this, we also designed a program to facilitate credits for small local businesses. At the same time, we recognize that there are people who have been affected in such a way that it has been impossible for them to fulfill their basic needs. That's why we implement different actions, such as delivering food and hygienic products, or direct economic support of around $180 to independent workers or self-employed people. In terms of tourism, our bet is for the pride and enjoyment local people finding visiting downtown and the monument zone. For this, we are planning extensive campaigns to promote local visits and strategies with businesses and cultural spaces to guarantee hygienic conditions. Cultural activities have been kept alive, not downtown, but directly in people's homes. We have designed an extensive and ambitious program of streaming videos of activities such as concerts, plays, movies, conferences, and workshops. We have also invited people to participate on them, to share their talents with everyone, taking advantage of all the things we can do with the same technology that is bringing all us together today. We are counting also with the reactivation of federal funding for monuments conservation, as well as the recent reactivation for the construction sector, to advance with our program of improvement, restoration, and conservation of monuments and public spaces. This will also trigger the creation of indirect employment.
Yes,
about your second question.
Acuérdate que vas a tener la primera respuesta.
No la escucho.
Ya, salte de...
Thank you very much, sir. We will come back to you in a minute on the second question. May I now request Madame Stefania Proietti, Mayor of Assisi? Please, Madam.
¿Sí?
We don't hear you.
¿Qué tal pinche teléfono?
No. We don't hear you. As I had a problem with my technical, I had a technical problem earlier. Let me just check if the technical people, are you able to hear, Madame Proti? No, nobody can hear you. There's a problem with the audio, Madam. No, we're not able to hear you. Maybe we come back to you after a minute. We ask the second question. We'll give you a moment. And perhaps if I could request our tech team to kindly liaise with the office mayor to see if the technical problem can be resolved. Meanwhile, I'm going to raise the second question and come back to them. Okay, we come back to you. So the second question that I'd like to ask you, mayors of the cities, is before the pandemic hit us, you had obviously certain plans for how you wanted your city to develop, and you had a certain vision of the city, you had certain urban development projects in place. How are you rethinking them now in this current context, or are you rethinking them? What are you seeing as the role of heritage in this rethinking, in the way that you're looking at the city and envisioning its next steps? Let me come back to you, Mr. Famu, and see what thoughts you have. Mr. Mohamed Famu, please go ahead, sir.
Okay, sure. Yeah, actually, well, you know, things are getting better. Before the COVID, we had meetings with our MCAs and our board members. Again, this is another opportunity to clarify one or two things. In Lamu, the mayor position now has been taken by the municipal manager, the municipality. So I'm the municipal manager for the municipality area, which is more or less the mayor, which I used to be 15 years ago. All right, good. So now our plans are, we're working on solid waste management, a policy. We're also planning to work on the Lama Island Integrated Development Plan. So those two papers, those two policies, I've already signed the contract, and we are now figuring out how to start, like the way how we are doing with you right now through this method. So we're going to do similar. Those are some of the requirements again for us to have those kind of papers. And this is to plan our city. Now the municipality is bigger than it used to be. Now it has gone all the way to the port area in Hindi. As we all know that Lamu is going to a huge port in Hindi area. So we're going to work on the city as well. So now, with the plans in place, it will manage us to maintain the heritage city site, which we love most to have it, and also to have the extension developments when it comes to the sea, the port, and other development, agricultural areas. We're also figuring out how we can now assist our fishermen by providing them the outboard engines so that they can go out in the deep sea and get bigger fish or get more fish, mostly during the day. And we are hoping that soon the COVID-19, inshallah, God willing, that it will stop, so that we can continue with our daily lives. But even before that, life has to continue. So we are figuring it out how best that we can get those plans in place. We're having various meetings with other stakeholders. We are, of course, observing the social distances issues. We are observing the washing of our hands. So it's a little bit more expensive than it used to be before, because now we need to take more care. Unlike before the COVID-19, things were really different. So I hope these are some of the challenges we all need to deal with. If there'll be any other question regarding that, I'll be more than happy to come on board. But we have a plan in place. Soon, as we're talking, soon we're going to discuss regarding our budget for the municipality and the Lamu County as a whole. So a lot of things are going to happen, God willing, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me come now back to Madame Proeti. Would you like to please respond to both the questions?
Now it is possible.
Perfect. Perfect.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for this important occasion to talk about our important cities. Thank you to the colleagues, the mayors of the important city in the world. Thank you to UNESCO. We are UNESCO Heritage since 2000. This is the 20th anniversary in December, and I hope that the COVID emergency will be finished, so we can celebrate this anniversary. Particular thanks to the director of the UNESCO site of Venice, Mrs. Anna Luisa Masso Thompson Flores, and to the other responsible of the UNESCO site of Venice, and to the Dr. Alessio Re, the secretary of the Foundation Sant'Agata of Turin. We are here to represent Italy and the cultural and the world heritage. Thanks to the Montepedia World Reserve and the Avvocato Francesco Paola that I great. Our experience of a city as Assisi that all over the world is known for St. Francis and St. Clare, Franciscans ideals, and so actual values in the themes of the webinar, Rethinking Urban Heritage for Resiliency and Recovery. Our experience was not very tremendous about the epidemic, only 30 cases in 30,000 inhabitants. So we are lucky and great in the control of the emergency of COVID, but now we are in the crisis of tourism. I think that this is the similar situation that all our cities have. In this situation of crisis, we have think to the city, to Assisi in the future. And so we, after the sanitary emergency, as administration, we are writing with the population, with the citizens, a document, Assisi 2020. This document in 10 points is an idea of a renaissance, of rebirth after this emergency, because we are in the crisis, for example, in particular as a public body, but also as a city in all aspects. We are in crisis because we don't have tourism, and the city lives in with the tourism. But in this crisis, we want to restart, and we want to restart together, administration, public body, and population. And so we have this document available in our websites. All citizens, all stakeholders, and also the friends of Assisi in all over the world can participate, writing the ideas for the rebirth after the COVID. We called these documents a pact for the rebirth, and we think an instrument of democracy, of participation, and we want to involve not only the city of Assisi, not only the inhabitants, but all the temporary citizens, all people that visit Assisi and loves Assisi. So also you that are hearing me in this moment can go in the website of municipality of Assisi, and you can find these documents. One of these points is called the value of the beautiness, the value of the cultural heritage. We want to restart from this value that are our common value of UNESCO sites. So please, I invite you now in the website for the documents, and I hope as soon as possible to visit Assisi and to stay in Assisi. In particular, in November, we have an occasion, an important occasion. Pope Francis called Assisi city message. Assisi is a city message for Francis, and we'll have the economy of Francesco, a new kind of economy with attention to people and environment. Pope Francis will be here, and I hope that you can be here with us here in Assisi as soon as possible. Thank you for this important occasion. Thank you for this organization.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam. I come back to you now, Mr. Miguel Parodi. If you could please buzz very briefly your response to the idea of the change or the rethinking in the development projects that you might have been considering before. Please, sir, go ahead.
Thank you very much. About your question, this is a very important subject for our being here, since we are aware that many of the European and Asian cities that are participating in this lab have already started the comeback process. We are just studying it, and to get to know your experience will be really helpful. What we have clear now is that more than changing, we are reconsidering the relevance of certain principles we already included in our urban development plans, to prioritize them in light of what we are living and learning now. I could talk, for example, about reinforcing the infrastructure, cultural, and economics and systems that promote and allow the activation of solidarity networks and to be a more resilient city from social fabric, promoting social participation to more and better public spaces for social interaction and market local bonding. Heritage will definitely play a key role in urban development, even more than the one it played before. Our heritage in its material and intangible expression is the heart of our local identity. It talks to us about our history and also about our strength and endurance, and as such about our possibilities for a better future. We have to promote even more that role of cultural heritage. And being a world heritage, it also links our local identity and efforts with our global identity as human beings. Currently, working with specialists from UNESCO, we are updating our management and conservation plan for the historical monument Zone of Querétaro. And all of these principles and considerations are to be included. Thank you very much, Jody.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these interventions. Thank you for all of the speakers. I just want to now request the experts we have with us to comment on these important points that you've raised, and also to look at the question of what alternatives we consider to support economic recovery and resilience, and what role cultural heritage could play in this. Can I first turn to Mr. Sudakasa to respond to this point? Mr. Sudakasa, please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you again for this opportunity to share with you all. I think that it's important, and I'm speaking really collectively for the continent based in South Africa, but working with the African World Heritage Fund. We have a collaboration with them to point out that the constituents and the communities and the stakeholders in the heritage community are really suffering for all of the points that have been alluded to earlier. Here in South Africa, we have a stage 3 of a 5-stage lockdown, so there's no flights in and out. So we're really still not starting to look at the rebound. Alternatively, countries like Rwanda
just said yesterday that they're going to start allowing some tourists to come back. But the new normal for the continent is going to be local for some period of time. There are countries like Tanzania that have said, look, we're open for business, but the world is not open quite yet. Agriculture was mentioned earlier, agricultural heritage, if you will. And that's an area to me that has some of the principles in terms of the absorptive capacity of human capital that tourism has. There are not that many sectors across the continent that you can say all of the countries have that, but all of them do have strong agricultural demand. A point was mentioned about the growth generally in the world. Well, on the continent, in the next 30 years, the population will double. So there's definitely an urban agriculture, and food systems is also a very topical issue right now, even in the midst of the pandemic. And so that's an area to focus on. Another is and we talked a bit earlier about climate impact. You still have roughly 600 million of 1.2 billion people on the continent without access to electricity. And so another area of focus, and particularly in the rural areas, but even the quality of electricity in the urban areas is not what one would want to drive economic development. So there's opportunity during this period to focus on infrastructure development, particularly renewable energy, particularly distributed systems, mini grids, et cetera. And so those are two areas that in this season, and I really do feel that it is that. I think that in the third, fourth quarter of the year, we will be adjusting to a new normal of travel intra-country. But I've said before, and I'd like to repeat in this platform, that the idea of local engagement, we're in the private sector, the idea of engagement with our academic institutions so that young people who are studying learn more about the heritage sites and visit them more, I think is something that should be developed. We're looking at a resilience fund, and you know that there's growing interest from the diaspora to support the continent and in culture. And so that's another constituency and community that in this period, I think it would be beneficial to reach out to, because that hasn't always been the target for the promotion of the heritage sites on the continent. It's been almost promoting, at least in the African context, African heritage and culture to the non-African world, almost assuming that everybody who's African knows these things already, which is not actually accurate. So I'll stop there, but those are some of the initial thoughts that I have about this subject.
Thank you. Those are very important points that you've raised. Now, as I move to, I request Mr. Luigi for your comments. I just want to take a moment to have a group photo, if I may. If I could ask everybody who's here to please turn on their cameras, panelists, please, for a moment, we would like to take a picture. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. All right, Mr. Sacco, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege having the opportunity to listen to the perspectives and also, of course, the issues arised by the mayors of so many cities around the world. And clearly, this is a difficult moment, and there's no need to comment on this. On the other hand, we also have to understand that this is also a moment in which we are witnessing a spectacular change in the status quo. We are not simply in a moment in which there has been disruption that should be seen in a negative sense. We are also in a moment in which we can also consider possible development paths for our cities. And from this point of view, I would think that, for example, one of the issues that has been raised by so many of the mayors for obvious reasons, given the context, for example, the disruption of the tourism industry, which of course is a serious problem for the local economy. is, however, also on the other hand, a lifetime opportunity to really rethink what is the role of tourism in the local development of a city. Because we also know how complex and sometimes even, let's say, detrimental some aspects of tourism development that is only targeting the increase in the flow of the visitors can have on certain cities. And the fact that over-tourism today is affecting certain cities but not others, of course, is no excuse to not consider the long-term consequences of this. So I think that one of the aspects that are particularly important, and for example, Venice was already cited, but one interesting aspect that was a consequence, for example, of the lockdown in Venice, is that there were Venetian citizens that for the first time in sometimes years or even decades were queuing to enter their own museums. Because during the high season that in Venice lasts all year round, it's practically impossible for a resident to access the museums. So what I'm saying by this is that we also have to rediscover, in some sense, the dimension of cultural citizenship and participation, and not only of the economic impact of tourism, that of course is important, nobody wants to deny this. But what I'm saying, and I'm also referring to the interesting initiative from the mayor of Assisi, this idea of, for example, of having a shared document, sharing with all the citizens the idea of building together a perspective on the future. This, I think, is particularly important. Co-creation and also giving space to bottom-up social innovation in the cultural and creative field, in a moment like this, can really be important, especially because we have to involve much more proactively the younger generations in the choices that we are facing. And for the younger generations, this has to do a lot, for example, with issues of digital innovation. This is also the moment to innovate. Clearly, innovation requires resources, and in many contexts, these resources are missing. But for example, as a European, I see in a moment like this a particular responsibility for Europe, because Europe is lucky enough in a moment like this to have the possibility to use a considerable amount of funds to foster structural changes and radical innovation through, for example, massive deployment of digital resources in heritage cities. And this can really become a pilot laboratory that can inspire and then can scale to cities worldwide. So I think that we Europeans in a moment like this have a particular responsibility, and in particular understanding how the massive development and deployment of digital technologies today can help, for example, the tourism sectors themselves to maintain, let's say, their visitor base, even in a moment in which there is limited movement, by creating new forms of engagement that in some sense predispose the visitor to the actual visit, and by the way, helps avoiding the usual behavior that is all the visitors flocking to 2-3 attractions, creating, of course, disruptive consequences in terms of social and environmental impact, but really having an opportunity to really understand the context that you're visiting, establishing an exchange that, of course, is bidirectional, because once you come back, you can also remain in contact with the place. If you, for example, have developed a digital platform strategy that can really help you remain in contact and even foster repeated visits that are today, of course, particularly important, because the visitor that comes again and again is less and less interested in the stereotypes, is more and more interested in local culture, is more and more interested into really building an experience that makes sense. And I think that this is the kind of tourism that we want. So, to come close to the conclusion, I think that on the other hand, it's extremely important also to understand how culture can help us in a moment like this. For example, in terms of social cohesion, we have experimented due to the lockdowns, for example, social isolation. And the fabric of our society is very much about social exchange. So, for example, digital platforms have been particularly important in this regard. But by digital platforms here, I really just also mean communication, let's say, through tablets or smartphones. And again, from this point of view, we are facing new generations that are incredibly imaginative. And for example, I would really like to stress that, for example, Africa today is really becoming the beacon of radical innovation with very frugal technological means in developing this new digital platform for innovation in creative content. So it's extremely important that the cultural world recognizes this, and that in the strategy of future resilience and redevelopment of our cities, we do not consider culture and heritage just as a marginal sector that contributes, let's say, to the local tourism economy and so on and so forth, but is in some sense the backbone of a strategy that can really involve citizens emotionally, cognitively, in a much deeper sense. And in this particular regard, it's very important that the cultural world takes also this kind of responsibility. It's about social impact. It's about behavioral change. When culture can really make the difference, it's about this, just to make an example, and then I conclude. We are speaking, and rightly so, on the environmental emergencies that we face. For example, we conducted a research on a representative sample of the Italian population on the determinants of waste recycling to understand which were the factors that really accounted for whether people recycled or not. And it turns out that the most important factor to predict waste recycling is cultural participation. It counts much more than income, education, age, and just whatever. So it's really important to understand that culture is a mind opener for us. And in a moment like this, when we have to enhance the resilience of our cities, culture is not just about the local tourism economy. Culture is about active citizenship and the possibility to really make the cities more resilient in terms of the behavior of the citizens in the first place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these thoughts, very thought-provoking indeed. Ms. Rebecca Evers, you have been working for a long time on issues of inequality, and obviously this pandemic has not impacted everyone equally. And you're also working in and teaching at a university which is in a World Heritage city, one of the most well-known World Heritage sites also. Could you give us your thoughts on how you think, what kinds of alternatives to tourism we could consider for economic recovery and resilience, and how you think, or what role you see for cultural heritage?
Well, thank you, Jyoti. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. Listening to such a broad variety of experiences, I'll be speaking from the perspective of Brazilian cities and heritage sites, and focusing on the unequal effects of the pandemic in poor urban areas, but also about the possibilities for grassroots participation in recovery. Brazil's urban periphery has been hit much harder than other parts of the country. We're still in the midst of the crisis as it's growing still. And people who work in the informal economy, in tourism, and also in other activities have been especially hard hit. The shutdown of touristic sites have affected informal workers harder than those who have jobs that might keep on paying their salaries. And I should note that in Brazil, the informal economy around tourism is often extremely competitive and reproduces inequalities that characterize Brazil more generally. And often in ordinary times, many people who work in the tourist economy as tour guides or other services work under terrible conditions with great uncertainty about the next meal, even under normal circumstances. So it's a situation that I think that might be a good moment for rethinking about how that informal tourist economy works. My work in Brazil, my research has been focusing on the incredible diversity of grassroots responses to the pandemic. Mostly this involves emergency initiatives such as delivering food to people and so on. But the kinds of projects that we have been seeing happening in Brazilian cities and outside of cities often signal an incredible economic potential of poor communities that goes unnoticed by any kinds of development policies. For example, grassroots organizations have been able to use online and offline resources to create super complex logistical systems for getting food from small farmers onto the tables of poor city residents. And another interesting example of this kind of grassroots capacity is a thriving grassroots journalism movement in Brazilian cities that has sought to combat false information about the pandemic with the creative use of cell phones and podcasts and community radio, kind of old and new technologies, combining them together. Other initiatives are specifically directed towards informal workers, such as programs for collecting donations to support artists and musicians and other workers in different kinds of cultural economies. And to me, these efforts demonstrate the endogenous productive and cultural capacity of territories largely ignored by the state as possible sites of economic development. There's an emerging discourse in many of these places that rejects the idea that they are lacking in resources. In Portuguese, they have a term, nós por nós, which can loosely be translated as by ourselves and for ourselves, which I understand is combining an idea that poor communities need to mobilize their own creative capacities together with a political culture of solidarity that contrasts some of that viciously competitive practice of much of the informal economy that we see in a lot of touristic sites. And these kinds of initiatives in Brazil have been appropriately called the solidary economy, which I think are the sort of practices that could help lead poor communities out of the vicious circle of inequality and towards a deeper and more sustainable recovery. So I would be hoping that we could be talking a little bit about how UNESCO can support this kind of sustainable economic practices in poor areas, in heritage sites and also other cities.
Thank you very much. I think, yes, we absolutely need to reflect on how we could be supporting these grassroots movements and initiatives. Let me just add on to the question to build a second question, to build on what you've been saying, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals and climate action, and ask you how you think in this current context, and specifically in the context of historic cities, can we look at localizing along localizing SDGs, localizing climate action for resilience and recovery? Let me come back to Mr. Sudakasa to please reflect on this first.
Sure, and I almost preempted that conversation from my vantage point with my discussion about the renewable energy development. Yeah. But it's because there are green jobs in developing particularly off-grid systems. It answers your first question to me, and it also responds in part to the second question. I also feel like, and it was mentioned by my co-panelist, Sako, in terms of the importance of digital development on the continent. So when you talk about decent jobs, if you will, as one of the Sustainable Development Goals, there's an opportunity to, particularly with young people, engage them and put them to work in digitizing the cultural and heritage offerings that the continent has. Unlike Europe, many on the continent are not captured in a way where you can do a virtual tour. So in this period, there is an opportunity to say, hey, let's move forward there. Let's, again, have more people on the continent and more visitors from outside the continent have a chance to actually see what the offerings are. Because in many instances, unless you physically go to our sites, even some of the urban sites, you just don't know because they're not captured well in print. They historically have not been captured well digitally. So, I think focusing on creating jobs, a colleague from Brazil talked about the challenge with food delivery in this space. I mean, that's in cities like my own in Johannesburg, it was a major issue, where you've got people on the fringes, if you will, in the informal sector who've been very impacted. So, for example, the digital logistics coordination ideas that have been developed in Brazil, how could we use those here in South Africa? So the other thing that I would say is the sharing in that space of good practice that is continental. How can we do more of that? How can platforms like the one that UNESCO has developed been used to help our communities. I think that would be, those kind of three areas would be good areas: the sharing, the renewable energy, and the digitalization.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Pierluigi Sacco, we're back to you for some other thoughts on how we can localize SDGs and climate action in the context of resilience and recovery for historic cities.
Thank you. A good deal of what I was already discussing in the previous round, I think is strictly related to the block of the goals that range between 9 and 12. So it's extremely important to think in terms, of course, of sustainable growth and responsible production, and of course, of fighting inequality. And this really has to do with also starting to think that digital access, to some extent, is becoming a basic human right. And it's not really possible to develop an equitable society if the real opportunities that can be deployed through the digital channels of the future is not really made fairly accessible to everybody. And this really means that we cannot have, as we have today, an entirely privatized and private-led strategy for development of digital platforms and a digital society. Because honestly, these players are maybe certainly very innovative in terms of content provision. But from the point of view of the economic organization, they are very traditional profit maximizers. Most of the big platforms look more like a 19th century company in terms of profit maximization than the real advanced companies in terms of social objectives of today. So this really means that it's very important that both the internet, the global institutions, and of course the various nations that can afford this should, I think, start launching also projects of public platforms that are not competing with what's being delivered by public platforms that are not competing with what is being delivered by private operators, because clearly private operators are interested in delivering content that is good for paying customers and that responds to a certain logic, marketing logic that we all understand and appreciate. But the point is that most of what we are thinking of today, for example, in terms of developing responsible citizenship, really inclusive societies, giving space and voice to small organizations, small cultural institutions, reaching out to the most marginalized communities and constituencies. This is something that can only be really served by a public platform whose objectives are inclusion and innovation. Because again, also in terms of social innovation, it's unlikely that you will see radical social innovation being pursued by for-profit platforms, because of course there's no really incentive for this. But public platforms could really turn the cultural and also heritage sector into a key area of radical innovation, as it is already happening, but in a very decentralized way. I mean, if we just review across the world what kind of advanced experiences are happening in this field, I just, for example, limit myself again to Italy. Just in Italy, I can see hundreds, literally hundreds of extremely innovative projects, mostly developed by very young people that are cultural and heritage related social innovation. But it's invisible. Nobody knows this. This does not arrive to the policymakers. This does not scale up in terms of global strategies of resilience for cities. So what we need is exactly this. We have to have also a public provision strategy, because the digital society that we are building today is more or less like the Far West. We have to turn this kind of Far West into a civil society in which human rights are guaranteed, in which a certain type of basic liberties are promoted, but especially in which the actually unbearable levels of digital inequality are actively fought. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rebecca, we're back to you. Please give us your thoughts on, you already started to talk a little bit about bridging these inequalities, but could you talk to us a little bit more about how you think we could get localizing these SDG actions or actions?
Well, since you brought up SDGs, I thought this was an opportunity to talk about SDG 16, strengthening institutions and connecting what I said before about inequality and grassroots organizations to the state and how we should think about the role of the state and government institutions, especially inclusive participatory institutions, which I understand to be central in SDG 16. One thing that my research on civil society responses to the pandemic has shown that grassroots groups, civil society organizations, are often the only ones operating in Brazil today that delve into the territories, find people, and understand their specific problems. So getting the food to those people, for example, has to do with that capacity that those organizations have. And many of them complain about the total absence of the state in their territories, except possibly as a police force. Brazilian federal, state, and local governments have responded, of course, to the pandemic, but largely by issuing large-scale stimulus funds that many poor people have difficulty accessing, building hospitals, and issuing quarantine decrees. But in few cases have we seen states effectively partnering with local civil society groups. And here I'm talking about health posts and social workers and schools, those kinds of representatives of the states that are in communities. In fact, the opposite seems to be happening at this moment in the pandemic. We've heard, for example, reports that health workers have stopped visiting some of the poorest communities racked by the crisis, and that local governments have, in crisis, economic crisis, defunded community daycare organizations and other local institutions. And I guess what I'm saying is that by ignoring that grassroots organizations can be partners in the crisis, the pandemic, states are missing an opportunity to strengthen what you might think of as micro-democratic institutions that could play a really important role in the recovery process that we hope is coming soon. Many have noted that the pandemic and its associated economic crisis has reaffirmed the importance of a strong state, but we also have to think about that as reaffirming the importance of a more democratic state, because promoting civil society organization on the periphery isn't somehow antithetical to the idea of a strong state. The kind of strong government institutions that we need are precisely those that can work with grassroots organizations, building stronger networks for promoting economic and political inclusion simultaneously. So put simply, international investments in resilience and recovery, I think, should think about how to connect SDG 10 about inequality with SDG 16 at the same time, promoting political inclusion as a way to bring state resources to poor communities through the organizational structure that communities have created for themselves. A more grassroots micro-democratic approach to what strengthening institutions means, I think, is fundamental for strengthening the capacity for long-term response.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity to open up the floor for some discussion, and the question box already has a couple of questions, but I want to encourage the participants to please raise some questions that we can address. I want to call on Adnan Ben Najma. Would you like to state your question, please? Would you like to raise your hand and ask your question? Adnan Ben Najma? Yes, please, go ahead.
Ok, très bien. Non, j'ai aimé poser la question au maire présent avec nous, parce que on sait tous, et moi je suis tunisien, que les États ont consacré des budgets, ont aussi proposé des textes de loi, des dispositions financières et peut-être fiscales pour justement encourager certains secteurs. Mais est-ce que dans vos communes, vous avez essayé de faire profiter le patrimoine de ces aides financières et fiscales éventuellement? Voilà la question. Parce que bon, malheureusement, moi, j'ai une petite idée, je vois que le patrimoine n'a pas vraiment profité pleinement de ces avantages fiscaux. On parle du secteur du tourisme, on parle du secteur de l'industrie, du secteur agricole, et quand on vient au patrimoine, on parle plutôt du ministère de la culture ou des affaires culturelles, mais on ne parle pas du patrimoine comme secteur et comme vecteur de développement comme tous les autres secteur, le transport, la santé, etc. Voilà.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's collect a few questions before I come back to the panelists. We have Rami Daher with his hand raised. Rami, please go ahead.
Thank you. We noticed that a lot of World Heritage cities who start gradually depending more on international tourism all through the years, gradually lose their a lot of other activities and functions that enable them to be more like of a living heritage, other economic functions, diversity of economic functions, and start depending primarily on heritage tourism. And this has affected a lot of World Heritage cities. So my question is, how can we learn from experiences of certain World Heritage cities who have maintained diversity of economic activities other than tourism, while also catering for a world international audience? Because I think currently this could be there could be a lot of lessons learned from such World Heritage cities that have maintained more of a living heritage, more engagement with local communities through various traditional or contemporary economic activities. So if there are any examples of World Heritage cities that have maintained this, I think this would benefit a lot how to counteract the stagnation currently within a lot of these World Heritage cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from Parastu Estrati, who's in the chat box. Parastu, would you like to state your question, please?
Hello, do you have my voice?
Yes, please go ahead.
Have a good time. Thanks for this very interesting subject. I have a question. I think we need new ways to generate revenue for heritage sites, because even after finishing COVID-19 pandemic, a similar condition may occur in the future, although I deeply hope it won't happen. I would like to know, in this very short, limited period of the time since starting the pandemic, have any new creative ways for increasing virtual tourism been experienced on any World Heritage sites? I mean, that kind of virtual tourism which could be considered as an economic resource.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We take one more question. Iman Benani, please go ahead. Iman, yes, please go ahead. Iman Benani? Yes.
Oui, vous arrivez à m'entendre? Bonjour.
Yes.
Bonjour.
Yes,
merci pour ces échanges fort intéressants, parce qu'il se trouve effectivement au Maroc. C'est peut-être, vous parlez tous les villes du patrimoine mondial, on parle du tourisme. Il se trouve par exemple là où je vis, la capitale de Rabat, inscrite sur la liste patrimoine mondial. Le tourisme n'a pas affecté parce que c'était le patrimoine et l'habitation, c'était plutôt une question de fierté, de partager, de restaurer et habiter un patrimoine qui va notamment de l'Antiquité jusqu'au XXe siècle. Moi, ça m'a interpellé l'intervention de Monsieur Sacco, qui me parle très intéressante, qui parle de l'alternative numérique et qui parle des visites virtuelles et des actions concrètes. Je reste très intéressée à comprendre, est-ce que c'est payant? Est-ce que c'est une activité qui génère de l'économie et qui pourrait ramener de la recette et réanimer un peu le fonds du patrimoine? Et comment se passe cette activité de citoyenneté, citoyen responsable? Comment impliquer les citoyens concrètement? Quelles sont les actions Et la plateforme, est-ce qu'elle est gérée par le public, par l'organisme public, ou vous sous-traitez au privé? Pour moi, c'est des pistes qui sont vraiment innovantes de votre part. Et l'idée, effectivement, de redécouvrir aux citoyens les musées de Venise, comment vous gérez ça? Parce que je pense même au niveau, par exemple, je pars du Maroc, on a envie d'abord de faire découvrir aux communautés. Là, je suis dans une commission gérée par le préfet, etc., et qui a envie de sensibiliser, mais de faire connaître, parce qu'il y a peut-être des habitants qui ne le savent pas et qui prennent plutôt le patrimoine comme opportunité, pas une contrainte à gérer. Donc, je reste à ma fin si vous pouvez nous guider et avoir des expériences que vous pouvez partager avec nous. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Okay, I think I come back to the panelists. I think we have quite a few questions now on the floor. Would any of the city mayors, city leaders like to respond to the questions that have been raised? Any of the city, no, you can't hear me? Can you hear me? Would any of the cities like to respond? No? Any of the other panelists, please go ahead.
Maybe I can start, given that the last question was directly addressed to me. I think that there is really an incredible opportunity in this regard, and I just make an example. Imagine, for example, the possibility to organize digital guides, for example, for digital visitors, in which you don't show the usual things, but you really hire, in this case, citizens becoming guides of their own city, but the parts of the city that you never realize exist, that don't know, and in some sense are not generally considered as tourist attractions. So, for example, this kind of service could be a service also for paying customers. You could really organize different ways to show the city around, and in particular let's say the hidden dimensions of the city, the not so obvious dimensions of the cities, engaging local entrepreneurship, also in terms of providing innovative services from this point of view. Once the digital, of course, the digital dimension is not exclusive. Once you start doing this, there will be physical visitors who come there that start asking for new kinds of experience of the city. Because what we have, the real problem is the stereotyping of the city. The real problem is that the tourist cities are increasingly modeled into what the average tourist expects from the city. And this also comes back to the first question that was raised. How can we contain, in some sense, this kind of impact? The problem is that we have to preserve services for residents. What happens when the level of tourism development goes beyond a certain threshold is that all the local retail shops are interested in serving tourists because these tourists have a better spending capacity, and this, of course, shrinks and shrinks the actual space of livability of the city for the residents. The administrations that were good at containing this tendency were particularly careful about this, particularly careful about giving a certain space for local services for residents, no matter what the level of tourism development and no matter what kind of demand there could have been for local retails serving basically tourists and the kind of tourist demand. So from this point of view, it's incredibly important to involve directly citizens and to involve directly also the identity of the city in terms of authenticity. This new digital possibility gives us the possibility to tell the stories we want to tell, and not simply to serve to the tourists the stories that the tourists want to hear. So it's very much about involving from the grassroots level the community to tell their own story to the tourists, but also to themselves. Because in many cases, the real danger is that tourist development is in some sense disappropriating local cultures from their own authenticity. And this is something that we have absolutely to preserve, because most of the really interesting stuff comes from local culture, which is not something static that has to be put in a fridge and preserved as it is. It's evolving, but it has to evolve also in terms of its local narrative and not simply in terms of the tourist stereotype that in this sense is a real threat. So there is the possibility to use the digital to make this economically sustainable, not simply as a temporary alternative to physical tourism, but as a way to develop a more sustainable form of physical tourism when the emergency will be over.
Thank you very much. Any other panelists would like to respond to all the questions that have been raised?
Just quickly, I think that this idea that Mr. Sacco brings connects very interestingly with what I said about grassroots communicators, which is a whole movement that we see happening because of the arrival in poor places of cell phones that make it so that poor people have been able to connect to the internet in the last 3 or 4 years. You see it in Africa, you see it in Brazil. We've had elections that have been strongly affected by the popularization of the cell phone form of internet. It also makes it possible for communication to come from the bottom up in a different way. And although there's obviously the social media, new technologies issue is huge, I think that there is a kind of potential there for people being able to speak their own experience and that can be to themselves, but also to the world in a way that I think it could be a wonderful opportunity for some transformative changes in terms of tourism, but also in terms of local culture.
Yeah, I would like to add to the conversation some of the trends that are happening on the continent, which involve linkage creation between the meetings, incentives, conferences sector of tourism and cultural tourism. And I'll use as an example Robben Island in Cape Town, that for many years the tour was just really about the late President Nelson Mandela's experience and stay at the island. But more recently, they've started holding fora and meetings on another part of the island where the discussion is about peace and reconciliation and negotiation. And so in the backdrop of this heritage site, if you will, there are other conversations that are contemporary that are taking place. And so that is starting in Rwanda and other places where, because you have parallel to the cultural and heritage tourism growth, you have MICE industry growth happening on the continent. So the idea is, how can one leverage and talk between the two? I also wanted to just reiterate the value and importance of creating linkages with the academic industry broadly. So that's K through 12 as well as universities. Because again, with the K through 12, I mean, and again, I'll use Robben Island as an example. Most of the tourists who come are from abroad or adults, but that means that young people in the country are not getting the history of that particular institution. And so if there were more opportunities to say every 10th or 11th grader visits this place, it creates an opportunity, but it also creates, I mean, you can do hackathons and come up with other ways to promote these sites as well through the eyes of a younger generation. And that hasn't happened as much. Similarly, for academic students at the university level, in the continental context, there hasn't been as much written about African heritage sites by Africans. And so you still see many things through the eyes of a colonial view that was studied well, but 50 years ago. This idea of contemporary discussion about these sites, even looking at some of the sites from the eyes of others, brings new opportunity. And in the digital space, you can capture that. So I think there's a lot that can be done. And I just wanted to share those ideas. You're still on mute, I think, Jyoti.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I just wanted to say thank you very much. This has been really very inspiring, very thought-provoking. We have courageous leaders of cities who have been taking innovative steps of their own, and all these new ways of thinking that you've suggested to us. It gives us a lot to think about and work on during the next sessions of the lab that we are now at the beginning of. I just want to see if there's any one last question. We're out of time, so we really need to end within the next few minutes. Any last questions? I see that Sana Nia has a question. I think that Russell Gold had a comment which was already responded to. Sana Nia, please go ahead.
Bonjour. En fait, c'est plutôt une réflexion parce que c'est vrai qu'on est en train de discuter par rapport à une crise touristique. Mais moi, j'essaye d'avoir une vision plus peut-être à long terme, une fois que l'éventuel vol et connexion seront rétablis. Est-ce qu'on ne serait pas face à un renouvellement d'un tourisme massif, encore plus massif, où des touristes voudront faire une sorte de rattrapage de tous les voyages qu'ils n'ont pas fait. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a des mesures ou des réflexions faites plus à long terme par rapport à cette situation actuelle? Merci.
Okay, merci beaucoup. So I'm going to take that as the last question so that we can close after this. So I just invite any of the panelists to make any final comments, any thoughts that have come based on all of the discussions that have been going on, or any other remarks in response to this question. Please go ahead, anyone who would like to speak. Any of the city leaders, would you like to take the floor? Mr. Famu? Please go ahead. Your microphone, Mr. Famu. You need to unmute your mic. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'd just like to sum up by saying that cities are about people. Now, when people are suffer or down, cities are also do suffer. So that's why we're trying to come up with a way forward regarding the agriculture and fishing, so that economy to come up back. So when people are satisfied, the city can strive even with challenges. Then the tourism will come when the world go back to normal. So those are some of the things I wanted to say. Also, there's one thing I want to share with you. Our formula here in Kenya, in terms of disbursement of funds, is through population. The higher number of people, the higher funds you get. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, so we have some issues. In a situation of Lamu municipality, we have less number of people, so our disbursement is low, but we have a lot of infrastructure issues, sewage issue, etc. So I don't know how do other cities go about it. Is a challenge for us, and I don't know how to go about it. If it's a matter of lobbying, we would like everybody to assist. We are doing our part. We do talk to our authorities, etc. But if the UNESCO, from your point of view, can also assist on that, we will also appreciate. Thank you. And I'm so glad to participate. Asante sana.
Thank you very much. Any thoughts on what Mr. Famu has raised or any other points? No last thoughts? Well, I think we've had a lot of very, very rich discussion and inputs. I think that we don't have an easy answer for the question that Mr. Famu has raised, and all the others. But I think certainly we need to reflect very carefully on how we can engage at that level and be able to support each of these needs of the cities and the citizens. I think we've had some very, very interesting ideas from looking at agriculture in the city to looking at environmental issues, looking at grassroots movements, looking at digital innovation, at digital tourism, to being able to really understand places locally, making which is a reality that in fact many times people, the residents of these heritage sites, the areas, are not aware of all the wonderful possibilities of the histories themselves, and so this is a moment also for that, and to look at the issues around the traditional use of materials, the blended financing that we heard about. There's been a really wide range of ideas. We need to sit down and carefully track all of these ideas that have been suggested during this discussion and reflect a bit on how we can work together. I think there's been some points raised about how UNESCO could function as a platform. Well, in fact, that's our role, is to convene people from different fields, different regions, to think together. So this is such an effort to collaborate together. And that's the idea, and we will hope to continue this and take the lessons from this. We've certainly taken careful note, and see how we can take these forward. So with many, many thanks to all the participants, to the panelists, to the leaders of the different cities who have participated, to all the participants who have been raising very interesting questions. Many thanks to all of you. And I cannot end without thanking our incredible tech team and our amazing interpreters, as well as all the team that has been working very hard to make this event happen. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.